Can you describe how you feel after 15 years of being a monk,
Well,
compared to what you might remember as before?
Well, this whole process started for me when I was 19, so I'm in my 50s now, so I do feel different. As I say, it's a gradual, well, at least for me, a gradual journey of transition with a lot of pain, but also a lot of bliss, both. A lot of sense of freedom, but also a lot of sense of fear and anxiety and horror and all the rest of it. They kind of go hand in hand, just as the Buddha taught. If asked what I teach dukkha, dukkha nirodha. I teach this sense of longing for more and the cessation of that. And if you open to one, you'll get the other. But you don't entirely escape the pain of life. It's just that the pain of life starts to, in a sense, be contextualized within a bigger sense of there being something bigger and more real. So in that sense, I suppose, in a sense, that's what I'm describing. I'm describing the kind of simple transition that I feel has been a kind of an ongoing process of kind of a deepening, you could say, for me. And also there's a process of grounding as well. I mean, there's a lot I could say, but I kind of prefer to keep it fairly simple. When I was in my early teens, I sensed that there was what you might call a numinous or underlying unifying principle in nature, except I couldn't articulate it. I didn't have any kind of conscious sort of spiritual aspirations in particular. I was a photographer, so if you look at my early photographs, you can actually sort of see it coming through the photographs. I've got sort of lots of photographs of kind of concrete with sort of shimmering kind of light coming through and things. So I always had some sense of there being something that wasn't solid, that was mingled in with all this solidity. I couldn't have expressed it in those terms. I didn't know what it was, but I have memories of sitting there speaking with people and sort of seeing a kind of like almost kind of like an underlying kind of mirage, kind of vapor, kind of sensation of them vibrating. And then in my late teens, I sort of had it completely. I had no clue that anything like this could happen, but I did have what is commonly described as a sort of a Kundalini type of experience. Now, I'm not implying, I never wish to imply that other people need to go through this or have this. It's just been my own particular journey, but it was a sort of, you could say, a kind of shock and awe awakening that was a very sort of accelerated introduction to something that I had absolutely no clue was even possible. Certainly never ever mentioned or spoken of in the world that I lived in. But something definitely happened. I lost the stone in 5 days. My voice changed, my character changed, I looked different, all within 5 days, and it was pretty spectacular actually. So that, in a sense, was the beginning of me having to make sense of that, and that's what I've basically been doing since that moment. So how have I changed? Well, I'm more grounded, a bit more integrated, and a bit more able to be present for fear and for anxiety and for all of those things which sounds perhaps not too enticing, but then on the positive side, I'm able to be more present for that because I feel more, in a sense, secure, in a sense of something that is safe, something that has radiance, something that is immeasurable. So in a sense, there's like an aperture that is gradually opening my ability to be present for those extremes, and at the same time begin to not just wake up but wake down into presence for my humanity, you could say. So I would say when I was younger, I probably was quite pleased with a sense of with myself, and that I felt I was waking up. I could see that there was a kind of a brightening, beginning to understand that the mind had a kind of a radiance to it and all of that. I sort of was quite impressed with myself. And as were many of my colleagues at my age, it's a sort of classic kind of unconscious incompetence that can arise. I think I've learned to make a distinction between awareness, which can be quite disembodied, quite impressive, but at the same time quite disembodied in the sense of it hasn't really incorporated that sort of a presence for the flawed human dimension, you could say. So awareness then is brought to bear more and more on our humanness allows us, I believe, to become more open to shadowy, murkier, flawed, imperfect parts of ourselves, and to begin to, in a sense, redeem them or become more interested just in being present for that and not intimidated or so much or upset or undone by it, if that makes any sense. And ultimately I would say there is a recognition that it is, and this is language that until very recently I've always avoided because it's sort of got very sentimental connotations, but it is ultimately an awakening of the human heart. But it's not the emotional heart, it's the heart within the heart, you could say. It's the spiritual heart, or the heart as the principal organ of spiritual awakening. And so in the Hindu tradition they talk about Amrita Nadi, which is it's like a kind of an energy channel that resolves at the center of the chest. So as the asavas, what we call the asavas, it's sort of the outflowing tendencies of mind begin to, because what we're up to most of the time is we're flowing out through sight, sound, taste, touch, thought. We're committed to that with that sort of forward-going attention, that sort of willful, forward-moving attention to try and assert and implant, speech mind on everything, so that everything is rendered solid and understandable and cognizable and manageable. And that's what the whole society is up to. So we inherit this whole pattern, this whole energetic pattern. And so with this practice of sila, samadhi, panya, what basically happening, these are the words for containment, sama, samadhi, sort of the undivided concentration of the mind and wisdom. It's like all that energy you could call the pranas that are flowing out, they begin to return to the source, like a turtle that sort of, in a sense, retreats back into its shell. And as you do that, then you begin to sort of sense the unified field. So what that means in terms of our heads that are busily thinking and trying to work things out all the time, the head sort of clarifies and thought becomes much more subtle and is much more orientated towards wisdom, in the sense of it's applied more to this insight into the way things are, as opposed to just be kind of thrashing around looking for something to keep itself entertained in one way or another. So that begins to clarify. And then in terms of the heart, all the sort of the emotional turmoil, in a sense, starts to, in a sense, transform into the radiances, the metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. These are called the sort of the immeasurable radiances. So the felt sense of one's emotional being is much more, it all starts to become much more universal and much less personal. So I'm not saying I don't think I'm anywhere near the end of the process, but I don't know if there actually is an end to the process. But what I am saying is that, to me, these are the sort of the markers that I'm noticing. Yeah, and I'm more able to, in a sense, describe them in my own terms as well, as opposed to just parrot all the usual stuff. So
would you say that, I don't know how to put it, but I guess to progress in your spiritual journey, it's important to take yourself away from ordinary life that we lead, certainly in the West, perhaps long-term retreats or monastic isolation, I suppose. It's necessary, would you say?
I don't know, I think we're all highly individual, so our kind of knots will all unravel in their own unique ways. But traditionally, and I think in the main, certainly important to set aside periods of time where you sort of challenge your general assumptions about what's going on and what you are. Because if you just hang around with other people who are committed to these general assumptions, the whole process of contagion, the whole process of entrainment, you just sucked into it. That is the power of community. So if your community is ignorant, if your community is committed to this sense of everyone knows what's going on. I mean, that's what the world's generally up to. Everyone's sort of giving the impression that they know when they say me and you, they give the impression that they understand what that means. But in truth, nobody understands what that means. And the more in truth you review those conventions of me and you, the less you can know about it. So in truth, all this madness that the world is, where you know what it's like when you see people on TV and talking and stuff. Of course, they may be skilled at what they're doing or the particularity of what they're doing, but in the main, the confidence that they are, in a sense, radiating about themselves and others and everything is complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
the kind of mindfulness project, which is the secular project that Mr. Kabat-Zinn sort of launched and now has reached critical mass,
yes,
and is uncoupled from a spiritual tradition, and is good money maker actually. It's doing very nicely.
I
it
noticed,
seems to have reached peak state, and the point of the Dharma is freely given, and mindfulness is part of a toolkit to help you have more insight. That's where in other traditions as well. But it seems to me like it's kind of moved to quite an extreme stage where we've got a kind of saturation of a kind of hallmark greeting card mindfulness, or it's been very highly commodified. And I just was interested in what your views might be on that.
Well, first of all, I think people sometimes forget that mindfulness is only one of 5 spiritual faculties.
It's part of the...
It's only one of 5 spiritual faculties,
one thread,
which is faith, energy, mindfulness, wisdom, and serenity. And faith comes first, by the way, I might add, before mindfulness. Also, I'm not going to comment too strongly on what's actually going on there because I don't know the full extent of it, although I do have some idea. But what I would say is, just in keeping with what I've been saying earlier, is that this impression of that if you understand mindfulness, you're somehow you can control everything. And you've kind of got a technique, a method that's going to give you sort of control of your life, but not completely blow your life to smithereens, which actually is what it will do, ultimately, because it is a mystical process. It's supposed to be a mystical... Life is a totally mystical experience in truth. you are not separate from the infinity of all time and space. You're a wave that is participant in it, and so the acclimatizing to that fact is the spiritual process. So mindfulness that, or a mindfulness that is taught, that doesn't take the grandness of that perspective into account, I think, is unfortunate.
But in a way, I mean, we discussed it a little bit ourselves, but it's a way in. So someone might be offered, in their work, so that people don't ask for pay rises or whatever. The little mindfulness session, a taster workshop, and that's all very lovely. But then it's a way into these other things. So it's packaged up as one thing, but then it can be a way in, a starting point.
Of course, in that sense, I'm not like overtly attacking it or criticizing it. Like I said at the beginning, I don't wish to do that. But what I am just pointing out is that it's not necessarily being contextualized within the tradition from which it came. It's been stripped out. Now the problem with that is that when you enter that arena, all sorts of other things sort of start going on that are kind of unconscious in a way, that start to constellate, like, for example, teacher-student roles, or almost you might say guru-disciple roles. Now, I've been in situations where I've seen it being taught, and in my opinion, all of that was being constellated in a sort of subterranean manner because it wasn't sort of being acknowledged consciously that actually that's going on. And so the tradition as a whole has all sorts of safety mechanisms and things built into it to account for that. Whereas if you strip it out, thinking that it's just some sort of secular exercise that you're doing, what can happen is, people can get caught in all the sort of the bigger stuff that can be activated by it. So they try to, in a sense, reduce it to something small and manageable, where in fact what they're doing is they're opening Pandora's box without all the toolkit that has been provided through the generations. And that can have potentially unfortunate consequences. So it's all well and good and it's all fine, but if it was, and this is what I said, what's the guy's name? I can't.
Cabot-Zinn.
Well, I know Cabot-Zinn, but the guy in Cambridge who's doing Mark Williams. I said this to his face. I said to him, look, there needs to be much more overlap between the sort of traditional teachers and the mindfulness teachers, so we're operating and understanding each other as a whole, and that you're not, in a sense, packaging Buddhism up into your kind of own little sort of package and running off with it without the wisdom of 2,500 years of tradition behind you to help contextualize what's likely to be ignited by entering into this sort of work. That's my take on it. And he agreed, by the way.
Oh yeah.
He agreed. So, but and I said, "Oh, I'll get it organised." But I mean, I can't. I don't have the resources, and most of the people that I know that could really contribute to that sort of dialogue are scattered all around the world.
But then a lot of people who have benefited would have been completely turned off by
me.
So no, but
yeah.
by being, in a particular context, and that would have.
Sure. That's why I think there's a lot of work to be done, you could say, in progressing this message in contemporary, into the sort of out into the contemporary world. But we shouldn't start fragmenting it into secular traditions and and all the rest of it. We need to take the tradition as a whole and start to translate it, incorporating the intelligence of not just Mark Williams and John Cabot-Zinn, but of all Western teachers, so we can meet and evolve it together and not make it into sort of a personal possession. It's not personal to anybody. And it's not good for people who are recipients of this teaching to only get a partial picture. Because look, we're all, whether we like to think it or not, we're all given to turning these things into doctrines and ideologies. And I've encountered so people who've been trained in this method. They've done a couple of weekends and they're nurses or whatever, and they think they're experts, and they come and listen to someone like me who completely bamboozles them, because I'm like very sort of slippery in terms of being able to sort of be nailed down. And they sort of write letters of complaint and everything, sort of saying, because they can't understand what I'm talking about. It doesn't fit into their sort of idea that there is this structured, clear, methodical technique that safely guides everybody to the same place. It just doesn't work like that.
I suppose that they're attempting to do that by offering things like the various MAs that combine, the practice of mindfulness for therapeutic purposes within the context of Buddhist philosophy, as they push it, and the sort of retreats at places like Gaia House. But I guess the spiritual kind of...
Look, there have been situations, for example, where someone's been, for example, chronically ill in a hospital, and someone who's been a nun for 25 years has been invited or goes along to sort of be a support, and they won't let them in because they don't have this qualification. This is a true story.
Really?
As if the universities are now the sole arbiters of what this tradition is about. They are the experts, and it's just mad.
Oh yeah, that is mad.
And it's all part of this false impression that's born of ignorance, that it's some sort of everything's under control and gives rise to clearly defined results. And the Theravada, unfortunately, can lend itself a bit to people who are that way inclined, because it's got lots of lists, and you can go through the scripture with a toothpick and say this and that and this and that. The Buddha said, I teach this so you become independent in the teacher's dispensation. Not that you all become kind of clones to some method or methodology, that someone is the ultimate arbiter of the ultimate authority. The whole point of this is that you become an authority unto yourself. There is no authority outside of yourself. The notion that there is completely false.
I've got a question. I like the way that you talk. I don't understand it all, like you're saying. I've got a question for you. I like that there's kind of cosmological mysticism sort of thing. And I was reading the Dinah St. Ruth book, and I've read it about 10 times now, and I don't really understand a bit about that which is. So that which is, which observes things that are born and that die, thoughts and feelings and all of that sort of stuff. So this thing that is like this immutable something or other.
Citta vimuti, spiritus sanctus.
Yeah, could you say a little bit about that? And does that like immutable thing go back to the Big Bang then? Is that part of...
Sorry?
Does that kind of thing that is go back to the Big Bang, or is that in any way... Just say a little bit about that, would be really good, I think.
Well, this is an area where there's divergence in the Buddhist tradition, or you could say in the Theravada tradition, around the teaching of anatta, or not self. Many people would assert that there is nothing metaphysical in the Buddhist tradition, in the sense of the Buddha taught that everything is not self. See through that, and your mind kind of goes into this sort of blank state of tranquility, and that's as good as it gets. In a sense, it can be a vehicle for people who have a humanistic agenda, or who basically don't want to believe in this notion of a God, basically, or of there being anything other than just the human condition, and making the best of that. To my mind, it's clear in the scriptures, and it's not just my opinion. I mean, it is my opinion, but I support it, I believe, in the scriptures. that the Buddha made it clear. You know, there's the 5 khandhas, for example, body, feeling, sensation, consciousness, perception, and all the rest of it. Anything or everything that is experienceable arises and passes away, and it's not self. That's how it's described in the scriptures. And then so people can turn the teaching of not self into an ideology. It just means that, well, that just means there's nothing. But it's not an ideology, it's a methodology. It's a methodology to help the process of distillation or disentanglement from your false self and your true self, which he describes very clearly as the citta vimukti, or the citta mukti, or the citta that is released. What is the citta? Well, that's fundamentally something for you to discover, but it's you could say it's your soul, and it's deathless, it's eternal, it's a singularity in the sense of it. There's no, you can't see it in the same way as you can't see your eye, but you can just be it. So, to my mind, that's what Diane is pointing to.
So that's that which is the
it's
experiences.
It's your divine nature, so to speak. That. In that sense, I think it's possible to introduce language from other traditions, or from Christian tradition or our own tradition, just to try and affirm and assert that what the Buddha is pointing to is not this kind of blanking out, or is not just a sort of simple kind of analytical awareness. There's a place for that, but then it's there to help the process of revelation. So they say, the best way I've heard this described, is like if you're looking for a needle in a haystack, which is what, in a sense, we're trying to do here. You've got all this stuff going on. You've got sights and sounds and thinking and feeling, sensations and perception and all the rest of it. And someone's saying you've got this thing inside of you which is unchanging and eternal and love, bliss, and all the rest of it. And you say, well, where is it? Because you've got all this other stuff going on. Instead of trying to point it out, which is one methodology, the Buddhist methodology is, in a sense, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. You don't look for the needle, you burn down the haystack, and then the needle is what remains. So that's what the teaching of anatta is for. It's a via negativa. It's a way of saying it's not this, it's not that, it's not this, it's not that, until what remains is realized. But something is realized. It's not just an annihilation of everything, so there's nothing.
There is something in the middle.
There is something. Well, we don't say there is something, because it's certainly not a thing, in the sense it's as much a thing as space is a thing.
Thank you.
First of all, I wanted to take issue about people don't want to believe that there is something. Personally, having spent a very long time with Christianity and things, desperately trying very hard to believe and not being able to, I found Buddhism a lot easier to handle, because there didn't seem to be this insistence. And when you say the first thing is faith, I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? So that's another question. But then another one is, so would you say, you said they're divergent opinions, that say Stephen Batchelor, writing as a Buddhist atheist,
I know Stephen
would have a different would have a different view, or is that just a different?
I think totally, probably.
Right, okay, fine.
But hey, I'm not the authority. You are.
It's for you to decide whether that was what you meant.
But look, with the thing of faith, okay, your general understanding of faith is that it has to be faith in something or some. But the word faith in Buddhism is saddha. It's much more to do with the gesture of giving your heart over to the experience of life, of your existence as it impacts you. So it's the entrusting of yourself fully, like, in a sense, to sit is a gesture of faith, because you're entrusting that the life that you're going to experience in this sort of most unmediated and raw way is going to be a good experience. You have faith that it's okay to really sense deeply into your life, into your experience, and that the result will be good. And then faith really begins to become established when you experience something that is unsatisfactory or imperfect, which probably won't take very long, and you then experience a cessation. And when we use the word cessation, it sounds like there's an absence, but actually cessation means there's a fulfillment. There's a momentary experience of fulfillment in that experience of dissatisfaction or imperfection, in a sense, vanished, and what remained was a heart momentarily experiencing the peace of that resolving. And so as you begin to have faith in that mechanism, it's like a flower turning to the sun. Something in you starts to open, because the basic idea that we have of life is that it isn't safe, that it's painful to be too present for it, because it is quite painful. There's nothing underlying that. There's nothing positive in that pain to be discovered. So in a sense, we're like a flower that's turned away from the sun and is drooping, which is where we feel this sort of sense of the weight of life and the sense of diminishment in life and the sense of disappointment, you could say, in life. So faith is really to do with these sort of issues.
Can I ask what it was like being a monk for 15 years? Was it terribly rigorous?
It felt rigorous at the beginning. Yes, when the morning bell used to go at 4 in the morning, I remember to wake myself up, I used to have to bang my head on the floor, because we slept on the floor, so I'd just be banging my head, like bang, 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 just to try and wake myself up. And my abbot, Ajahn, he was an ex-Marine.
Oh my God! Oh man.
He was in the Marines in Vietnam, and he sort of made me into a bit of a personal project, because I was a bit of a kind of undisciplined young man. So I can remember in my first winter retreat, I had quite bad flu, and of course when I was used to staying in bed and being taken care of by my mum when I had flu, and he made me sit through it. I'll never forget. He made me challenge my idea of my feeling of limitation. That I had to just sort of rest, and he made me sit with it. And like snot flowing down my front of my jumper and things. It's just, so in that sense it was hard, but you sort of become accustomed to it. It's like the whole question of discipline is interesting, because we think of it, discipline in many ways, as a burdensome thing, but it becomes fairly natural when you begin to, in a sense, experience the fruits and the benefits of discipline, and when you begin to feel that actually your life is happier and better for it, you become much more willing and open to integrating it and living with it. And so, over the years it starts to become easier. And so, while for me it was never easy getting up at 4 in the morning, particularly, it became easier, and then get used to eating just one meal a day. That was fine, and you enjoy the benefits, enjoy the fruits of a sort of monastic life. It became easy. It was an easy life for me in the end. Much harder, actually. I find it much harder being out in the world.
Yeah.
Less support, more. The one thing I've never been able to work out is how to make money. It's the one thing I'm hopeless at so far. So that wasn't really a requirement in the monasteries. These sort of challenges can take up a lot of time, but then, in a sense, it's kind of a stress test of what I learned in the monasteries, isn't it? And so that's the way I viewed it and tried to use it.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Making decisions, I'm reflecting on the way I make decisions at the moment. Do you have any framework for deciding, knowing whether something is a good decision? Sorry, framework was a bad word to use, but...
In the main, it's a question of being able to hold the intensity of not knowing, or not having the answer. Because more often than not, when we are faced with a decision, we want the answer. And if we don't have the answer, that feels uncomfortable. And we don't like feeling uncomfortable, so then we tend to just opt for an easy answer. And so in that sense, we don't really engage our whole body and mind in the process. So we may not get the right answer. So with serious decisions, then I kind of trust there is an intelligence usually that kind of points us in the right direction if we have enough trust in life, and if we do have a question that needs answered, then we just ideally just bring consciousness to bear on the question and wait for our sensitivity to inform us in its own time, not my time, what the next step should be. Maybe the question might actually just disappear, might become irrelevant, or might become clear that actually something needs to change. So there's a place then for respecting the process, the natural process that has to be gone through, and it has its own rhythm, takes its own time. So if you trust that, and you do that, then I believe you will make intelligent decisions that are kind of in keeping with how to, in a sense, direct your life skillfully. But if your decisions are being influenced by other things, desires and hungers and irritation and unresolved pettiness and all the rest of it, then you're unlikely to get such a good result. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
So sometimes that just means enduring the pettiness. You've got to be, you know yourself when you don't trust something that your mind's telling you. Well, you just say, okay, I hear that voice, but I can't act on that because it doesn't feel right, it doesn't sound right, won't have a good result. So you kind of feel your way towards what feels like a kind of mature resolution. It's like with my disrobing, that was just not a decision I could consciously make. I didn't just wake up one day and think, oh, I'm going to leave now. It sort of gradually crept up on me, and it was not just internal circumstance, but it was also external circumstances conspired. So it was like a whole event. All sorts of things kind of came together, and then added up to that. What for me was a kind of momentous decision to disrobe, because 10 years didn't even cross my mind, wasn't even a possibility. Yet it happened. And if people ask me, why did I decide to leave? I always say, I don't know. It's just everything conspired to bring me to that point. And a lot of it probably wasn't even personal to me, self-generated.
Yeah.
Do you sometimes regret that decision?
I don't regret the decision, but I feel sad and I feel grief about the fact that the community that I ordained into didn't manage to go through, hold together. and because it could have, and if it had, it would have, I think all of us who have been involved would have probably still been there. So yeah, I don't really dwell on regret, but I think there is a pain associated with what happened in our community, and I think it's experienced by everyone in it and out of it. You know, it's like a family that, if you can imagine, you've got a big family and something breaks it up. The irony is it is still a family, it's just that I don't think anyone's really facilitating recognition of that. When I meet ex-monastics or whatever, it is